What if everything you believed about happiness and friendship after 70 wasn't quite the whole picture? What if letting go, not holding on, is where true peace begins? And what if your golden years weren't about social circles, but sacred solitude? We've been told that joy comes from being surrounded by people, family, friends, colleagues, gatherings, that the more connected we are, the more fulfilled we feel. But what if that idea only tells half the truth? As we grow older, especially past 70, something deep within us begins to shift. The friendships that once anchored us may no longer hold the same meaning. The excitement of lively parties, the pressure to keep up, the endless urge to feel included, they start to feel like echoes from a different chapter of life. Could it be that those moments were never meant to last forever, but to teach us something greater? We live in a culture that glorifies busyness, noise, and being known. We're taught to measure our worth by how many people call us, how many gatherings we attend, how full our calendar is. But the Buddha, in his profound wisdom, offered a gentle yet radical truth. You cannot travel the path until you have become the path itself. Fulfillment isn't found in how many people surround us, but in how deeply we've made peace with ourselves. As we step into our later years, Buddhist philosophy invites us to embrace a quieter kind of joy, a joy that doesn't depend on applause, a freedom that comes from not needing anyone's permission to be content. In this video, we'll explore 6 deep reasons why friendships are no longer as essential after 70. Not because people don't matter, but because inner peace begins to matter more. We'll walk through the beauty of solitude, the strength of letting go, and the liberation that comes when we stop seeking approval from others. And here's a gentle reminder: letting go is not losing. It's gaining something greater, a life of clarity, of intention, of wholeness, a life where your happiness no longer hangs in the hands of others, but rests calmly in your own. So, stay with me until the end, because this journey may not only change the way you view friendships, it may forever change the way you view yourself. 1. You no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. For much of our lives, we're conditioned to chase approval. As young adults, we run after success, validation, and the comfort of being liked. Friendships, at times, become mirrors, reflections we use to prove we are respected, accepted, even loved. But something profound happens as we reach 70. That need to impress others begins to dissolve. We begin to ask, who am I trying to prove myself to, and why? The Buddha taught that clinging to outside validation leads only to suffering. Peace, he said, can't be found in the crowd. Do not seek it without, he warned. Peace comes from within. Take Harold, for example, a man who spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, surrounded by co-workers, always networking, always in the loop. He believed his social value defined his worth, but once he retired, those connections started to disappear. Invitations stopped coming. Emails fell silent. At first, Harold resisted. He tried to keep the conversations going, but eventually he saw the truth. Those relationships weren't built on depth, they were built on convenience. So Harold turned inward. He picked up hobbies he'd long forgotten. He sat with his breath in meditation. He took long walks in the morning silence. And in that stillness, something beautiful emerged. He no longer needed the world's approval. He had finally accepted himself. Of course, that transformation didn't happen overnight. In the beginning, Harold felt a strange emptiness. Morning stretched on in silence. No calendar alerts, no chatter. The absence of noise felt like loneliness. But was it really loneliness? Or was it space? Space for something new, something true. Harold's awakening had begun, but like all awakenings, it didn't come without shadows. Even after embracing solitude, moments of doubt crept in. He found himself asking, "Have I become invisible? Am I truly alone now?" These questions echoed through his quiet mornings, lingering like mist that refused to lift. Until one day, during his daily walk through the park, something caught his attention and shifted his entire perspective. On a bench shaded by old trees sat an elderly man, alone. No phone in hand, no companion by his side, and yet he radiated a quiet joy, as if contentment itself were sitting beside him. Intrigued, Harold approached the man and struck up a conversation. The stranger, whose name was George, chuckled warmly when Harold mentioned his feelings of loneliness. "I used to be just like you," George said, his eyes twinkling. "I needed people around me constantly, to feel seen, to feel like I mattered. But one day, I realized something. My worth isn't measured by the number of people in my life. It's measured by how at peace I am with myself." Those words sank deep into Harold's heart. What if he stopped worrying about what others thought? What if he allowed himself to simply be, with no need to perform, no need to seek anyone's approval? So he gave it a try. He replaced networking events with quiet walks. He swapped small talk with deeper conversations with himself. He began journaling, reflecting on his journey, and experimenting with mindfulness. At first, the silence felt foreign. The lack of noise felt almost too still. But over time, the quiet became his comfort. No longer needing an audience, Harold discovered that his own presence was enough. One evening, he sat by the window and watched the sky erupt into sunset, bold streaks of orange and crimson painting the horizon like a living canvas. He smiled and thought, "This moment is beautiful, and I don't need anyone else to confirm that for me." His experience echoed the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, who once said, "Do not look for sanctuary in anyone except yourself." True peace, true self-worth, true happiness, they don't come from the outside, they rise from within. So if you ever find yourself afraid of friendships fading as you grow older, remember Harold's journey. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You're already enough, just as you are. 2. Peace becomes more valuable than socializing. There is a powerful parable in Buddhism. A man walks through life carrying a heavy sack of stones. When he meets the Buddha gently asks, "Why do you carry this burden?" The man replies, "Because I always have." And the Buddha simply smiles and says, "Then put it down." Friendships can sometimes become like that sack of stones. While they can bring joy, they can also become obligations, calls to return, invitations to accept, expectations to fulfill. Many of us continue maintaining relationships not because they bring happiness, but because of habit or guilt. Take Margaret, for example. In her younger days, her calendar was full: lunches, dinners, parties, weekend meetups. But slowly, something shifted. After each gathering, she noticed a strange feeling, not joy, but exhaustion. Instead of feeling uplifted, she felt drained. At first, she brushed it off. She told herself, "Friendships take effort. This is just part of life." But deep down, she began dreading certain phone calls. She felt obligated to attend events she didn't enjoy. And the conversations, once vibrant, now felt repetitive, shallow, disconnected. One evening, after yet another dinner filled with recycled gossip and polite nods, Margaret sat quietly in her living room and asked herself one honest question. Why am I doing this? Was she truly happy? Or was she simply afraid of being alone? And so, Margaret made a bold decision. She stopped. She stopped forcing herself into social rituals that drained her. She stopped apologizing for declining invitations. She stopped mistaking busyness for belonging. At first, the silence was jarring. The stillness felt almost too loud. But as the days passed, that stillness became something sacred. She began to rediscover herself. She read the books she had always meant to read, uninterrupted. She sat on her porch in the golden light of morning, listening to birdsong and feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She took long walks in nature, noticing things she'd never paused to notice before, the way the leaves danced in the breeze, how the sky changed hues as the day faded. It was as if life was whispering to her, This is enough." And she believed it. Margaret let go of the guilt. She realized that choosing peace isn't selfish, it's essential. She remembered the Buddha's words, "Silence is an empty space. Space is the home of the awakened mind." And for the first time in years, Margaret felt awake. In the quiet, her thoughts grew clearer. She no longer replayed meaningless conversations in her mind, wondering if she said the right thing. She no longer felt the fatigue of small talk that never truly touched the heart. Instead, her mind opened. Her heart deepened. She discovered that companionship doesn't always come from people. Sometimes it comes from the trees, from the act of creating something with her hands, from the quiet inner voice she'd long forgotten how to hear. She no longer needed to be surrounded by others to feel fully alive, because she had found a life that was fully her own. One afternoon, a friend from the past called, inviting her to a gathering. Margaret smiled gently and said, "No, thank you." Not because she was rejecting others, but because she had something more important planned, to simply be at peace with herself. So if you ever feel conflicted about stepping away from social obligations, remember Margaret's story. Peace is not something others grant you. It's something already waiting within you, waiting to be welcomed. As Margaret discovered the richness of a quieter life, she found peace not in numbers, but in meaning. And she wasn't alone in this realization. Many come to see, with time, that fewer connections often lead to deeper clarity. 3. Fewer friendships mean fewer disappointments. One of life's most sobering lessons is this: not every friendship is built to last. As we age, we begin to understand that time doesn't always preserve connection. Over the years, we experience heartbreaks, betrayals we didn't expect, friendships that turn one-sided, bonds that quietly slip away without closure. And by the time we reach our 70s, we see that fewer friendships don't only mean fewer obligations, they also mean fewer disappointments. Why? Because with every friendship comes expectation. And expectations, especially the unspoken ones, carry weight. When they aren't met, they often bring pain, even if no harm was intended. That gap between what we hoped for and what we received becomes a silent ache. William, now 78, knows this truth all too well. For decades, he poured his energy into friendships. He made the calls, he checked in regularly, he showed up when it mattered. But over time, he noticed something. Many of those friends stopped reciprocating. They got busy, drifted away, and William, once surrounded by people, suddenly felt alone in his efforts. At first, it hurt. He'd sit by the phone, waiting for calls that never came. He'd scroll through old photos, remembering shared laughter, wondering how those connections faded so quietly. Then came the question that shifted everything. Was he holding on because these friendships still nourished his soul, or simply because they'd existed for a long time? Was he valuing the depth of the connection, or just the history? One morning, sitting in a quiet cafe, William watched a group of young men animatedly discussing work and future dreams. He smiled. He remembered being just like them, when friendships revolved around ambition, career, and shared hustle. But he wasn't that man anymore. And maybe, just maybe, his friendships needed to reflect who he had become, not who he once was. From that moment, William began to choose differently. He stopped chasing connections that had quietly run their course. Instead, he began to nurture the few that truly mattered. He reconnected with an old neighbor who shared his love of gardening. He spent his afternoons painting by the window, letting colors express what words no longer needed to. He meditated each morning, finding stillness not just around him, but within. It dawned on him. Peace didn't come from having more people. It came from having the right people. And even more importantly, from no longer needing people to define his peace. William also began to embrace one of Buddhism's core teachings, impermanence. Just as the seasons shift, so do human connections. Clinging to what no longer serves us only deepens our suffering. But when we let go, when the heart is no longer attached, it becomes light. It knows no suffering. Years of holding on had left William feeling weighed down, but with every friendship he released, he felt freer. And then, one sunny afternoon, the phone rang. It was Freya, an old friend from long ago. Her voice trembled with apology for the years of silence. William simply smiled and said, "I hold no resentment. We're all walking our own paths." And in that moment, he understood something powerful. He didn't need anyone to complete him. He was already whole. So if you've ever felt the sting of friendships fading, take a deep breath. Let go of the attachment. And remember this: every relationship has its season. And the most enduring, most meaningful friendship you'll ever have is the one you cultivate with yourself. As William discovered the freedom that comes from letting go, he also realized something deeper. Time, once taken for granted, had become the most precious gift of all. 4. Your time becomes more precious. When we're young, time feels endless. We spend it freely, almost carelessly, filling our days with obligations, plans, and social gatherings without much thought. But as the years pass and we step into the later chapters of life, time begins to feel different. It becomes sacred. It's no longer about how much time we have, but how we choose to spend it. Think of Richard, a vibrant man now in his early 80s. Once known for his social calendar filled with events, dinners, and community meetings, he had always believed that staying busy and connected was the key to feeling alive. But slowly, something began to shift. Long conversations began to wear him out. Large gatherings that once brought joy now felt like chores, boxes to tick rather than moments to savor. Then, one quiet afternoon, after returning from another noisy gathering filled with repetitive stories and surface-level chatter, Richard sat down and asked himself a question. Is this really how I want to spend my time? The answer, clear and calm, was no. For years, he had said yes out of habit. He believed that socializing was necessary to stay relevant, to feel included. But now he saw the truth. Most of these events drained him more than they fulfilled him. He wasn't staying active, he was staying distracted. So he made a decision. He wouldn't spend another moment on things that didn't bring him joy. He would stop living out of obligation and start living with intention. From that day forward, Richard began reclaiming his time. He dusted off his old painting supplies and rediscovered his passion for art, a love he had set aside decades ago. He began waking up early to walk through the park, savoring the sound of rustling leaves and the warm, golden light of sunrise. He explored meditation, allowing his mind to settle into stillness rather than be cluttered with needless conversation. And then, one evening, the phone rang. An old friend was inviting him to a dinner party. Richard paused. He smiled, and he politely declined. Instead, he made himself a cup of tea and sat on his porch. He watched the sky slowly melt into hues of amber and violet as the sun dipped below the horizon. And in that moment, with no audience, no event, no noise, he felt something profound. Peace. He remembered the Buddha's words. The trouble is, you think you have time. But now, Richard understood. Time was no longer something to spend recklessly. It was something to honor. He didn't need to fill every moment with people or plans. He just needed to fill it with meaning. So if you ever find yourself saying yes simply to avoid disappointing others, take a breath. Ask yourself, is this truly how I want to spend my time? Because once you begin to value your time, you begin to live a life of true intention. 5. True companionship comes from within. As we turn inward and begin honoring our time, a new question often arises. But what about loneliness? Many fear that letting go of friendships will lead to isolation. But there's a powerful difference between being alone and feeling lonely. A difference that a loner at age 76 came to understand firsthand. As Richard discovered, when we begin to honor our time, we're invited into a deeper space, one that many once feared, solitude. But what if solitude isn't emptiness, but fullness of a different kind? The fear of being alone is something many people carry into their later years. We worry that letting go of friendships will lead to isolation, that stepping away from busy social lives might leave us hollow. But loneliness and solitude are not the same. And Ilona, at 76, learned this in a way that changed her life. For decades, Ilona had surrounded herself with people. There were book clubs to attend, neighbors who stopped by unannounced, retired colleagues who kept the group chats going. On the outside, her life seemed lively and connected. She rarely declined an invitation, always smiled at gatherings, and was known as someone who was always there. But inside, something felt off. Even in a room full of people, Ilona often felt alone. There was an emptiness she couldn't quite explain, a sense that her presence was performative, her participation habitual. Then, one evening, she sat at a dinner table surrounded by familiar faces, listening to familiar stories. The same jokes, the same gossip, the same complaints recycled yet again. And in the middle of it all, she asked herself, "Am I truly enjoying this?" For the first time, she allowed herself to answer honestly, no. That night, something shifted. She gave herself permission to make a change, not out of sadness or resentment, but out of truth. Ilona began gently stepping back. She stopped saying yes out of guilt. She no longer forced herself to keep up with every gathering or message thread. Instead, she turned toward herself. not to isolate, but to reconnect. At first, the quiet felt unfamiliar. The absence of constant chatter left an echo she wasn't used to hearing, but slowly she began to fill that space with things that felt true. She took slow, intentional morning walks, pausing to notice the way sunlight filtered through the trees. She picked up painting again and would spend quiet afternoons lost in color and canvas without worrying about interruption. In the evenings, she curled up with books she'd been meaning to read for years, no longer checking her phone every few minutes. And then, one peaceful afternoon, Ilona sat on her porch, sipping tea. There was no noise, no plans, no guests, just the wind, the trees, and the stillness of the moment. And in that space, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. She realized she didn't need to constantly adjust herself to fit in. She didn't have to maintain every relationship out of fear of missing out. The companionship she was looking for had been inside her all along. She remembered the Buddha's teaching. If you are quiet enough, you will hear the flow of the universe. You will feel its rhythm. Go with this flow. Happiness lies ahead. And now Ilona understood. She wasn't alone. She had herself. And that was not just enough. It was everything. So if you ever find yourself fearing solitude, remember Ilona's journey. True companionship doesn't come from the number of people in your life. It comes from how comfortable you are in your own presence. And when you embrace that inner connection, something beautiful happens. As Ilona discovered, true companionship blooms not from the crowd, but from the quiet comfort of being at home within yourself. And from that sacred place within, something powerful begins to emerge. The ability to let go. 6. Letting go opens the door to true freedom. One of the greatest gifts of growing older is the clarity to let go, to release the expectations, the obligations, and the emotional burdens that we once thought we had to carry. James, a man in his late 70s, had lived much of his life believing that an active social calendar was the secret to happiness. He convinced himself that saying yes to every event, every dinner, every invitation was proof that he was truly living. But deep down, he was tired. For years, he pushed himself to keep up, to stay connected, to maintain appearances. Even when he didn't feel like going out, he went. Even when he longed for silence, he forced conversation. The belief that staying busy equaled staying alive was deeply rooted in him. But over time, that belief began to crack. He started to notice something unsettling. Many of his friendships were held together not by joy, but by obligation. He would show up, not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. Then, one night, everything changed. James was at a bustling restaurant, seated with a group of familiar acquaintances. The room buzzed with laughter and loud voices, but he wasn't laughing. In fact, he wasn't even fully there. His eyes were fixed on the soft glow of a flickering candle in the center of the table. The noise around him faded, and a single thought filled his mind. I don't need this anymore. That moment was his turning point. James decided to stop pretending. He would no longer stretch himself thin to keep up appearances. He would no longer chase friendships that left him feeling emptier with every interaction. Instead, he would give himself permission to be honest, to choose peace over performance. At first, it was difficult. He hesitated before turning down invitations. He worried, would people notice? Would they judge me for stepping away? But to his surprise, they didn't. Life moved on. The world didn't stop spinning just because he stopped saying yes, and in that space he created, he found something unexpected: freedom. His days became simpler, yet richer. He spent mornings wrapped in stillness, a hot cup of tea warming his hands, birds singing gently outside his window. Afternoons were filled with long, slow walks where he noticed things he used to overlook: how the leaves whispered in the wind, how the sunlight danced along the path, how his own breath moved in rhythm with his steps. Evenings were no longer rushed or filled with meaningless chatter. He returned to books that had gathered dust. He cooked nourishing meals, simple but made with care. He no longer felt the need to laugh when he didn't want to. He no longer forced conversations that drained him. He simply allowed himself to be. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. He remembered the words of the Buddha: "You only lose what you cling to." James finally understood. Letting go wasn't losing, it was liberation. By releasing friendships built on duty instead of depth, he made space for something greater: the freedom to live authentically, to invest his time in what truly mattered, to embrace the quiet beauty of life without apology. So if you find yourself struggling to let go, ask yourself this: are you holding on out of love or out of fear? Because when we release what no longer serves us, we create room to grow, to breathe, to come home to ourselves. Letting go is not an act of isolation. It is the highest form of self-love. It's the doorway to a life lived in truth, and that, in itself, is the most profound freedom of all. Final thoughts: a life of inner peace at 70 and beyond. At this stage of life, we're no longer defined by how many friends we have or how many invitations we accept. We are no longer bound by the pressure to belong or the fear of being alone. Instead, we enter a sacred chapter where peace, self-awareness, and quiet fulfillment become our true companions. This is the season where we no longer live for others' approval, but for the soft, steady contentment within ourselves. You've lived through decades of laughter and sorrow. You've watched people come and go, and now you understand. Not everything or everyone is meant to stay, and that's okay. Now the question becomes: what truly brings you joy? Now, in this moment. Not what used to, not what's expected, but what lights up your soul today. Is it those quiet morning walks, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the simple beauty of stillness? Is it the ease of relationships that uplift you without needing effort, those that feel like home, even in silence? More than anything, are you ready to embrace the freedom that comes with letting go? The freedom to release the guilt of saying no. The freedom to stop clinging to people who have already drifted. The freedom to cherish yourself as your own truest companion. Because solitude is not loneliness. It is a sacred space. A space where your truest self finally has room to breathe. And when you live from that space, life becomes lighter, simpler, more meaningful than ever before. The answer to fulfillment has never been outside of you. It has always been within. As the Buddha so wisely said, "Be a light unto yourself." If this message resonated with you, consider subscribing to Buddhism Seeds, where we explore the wisdom of life, the quiet joy of solitude, and the path to lasting inner peace. If you found value in today's video, gently tap like, share it with someone who may need to hear this, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your reflections. Remember, your greatest peace is already within you, just waiting to be embraced. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.